our father.
Okay.
And I'll just ask you to speak nice and loud so that the people online can
I'll
hear.
try to do my best.
Okay, I mean, I don't think my father needs major introduction. He'll introduce himself, but really appreciate that my parents, especially my father, agreed to come. My father, I will just say, has really taken on a cause and a part-time job, speaking as a survivor in recent years, even more than you did years ago. This is just for you to realize, in the last 24 hours, this is his third speaking. He spoke yesterday on Zoom to an office that was having a Holocaust event. And then last night he spoke in Beit Shemesh to a community-wide event with close to 500 people. And tonight, so really, Abba, we appreciate your additional strength to be able to do this 3 times in the difficult day that Yom HaShoah is. So thank you. And Ima, good that you're here. Last year, unfortunately, my mother was in the hospital on Yom HaShoah when my father spoke twice. So we're very happy that this year Ima's able to accompany to all of the talks. Thank God. Yeah. Thank God. Okay.
Okay, so it's all yours. This
Thank
is
you.
being recorded also.
Great. Good. Thank you.
Just
So we'll have the
the
recording. Excellent. And if you could just pour a little water, please. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to me. I would like to convey to you the share the life of a child Holocaust survivor, what occurred in my life, but a representative of being a child survivor and where I am now. And also, time if it allows, I also want to share with you the lessons I derive from having through the war and being so it's a history of my life in the Shoah and coming out. So my name is Charles Yechiel Siegman. I was born in 1935 in Scheveningen, Holland, a beach resort near The Hague. I was the youngest of 5 children. Our parents operated a wholesale postage and stationery business, including servicing neighboring countries. And what I recall as a child was a formal activity, get into trouble or not in trouble, and parents were very active with the family. The first hint that their world was falling apart, let me just add also, Holland in World War I was neutral. And a lot of people both came from Germany to Holland. And also a lot of people felt that the war, which was heading out already, would be again neutral. So many people did not make any provisions compared to others. And they had to deal with that. When the Germans invaded Holland in May 1940, they concentrated initially by taking command of critical parts of the country. They took command of the radio, of utilities, of railways, the press, nationalized industries, including many businesses that were owned by the Jews. Over time, restrictions were imposed. Jews were required to wear a yellow star the David badge, Yod. Jews were no longer permitted to mix with Aryans in school, parks, concerts. They separated and collected people for the future. And people were not allowed to leave the country. Holland's major concentration camp was activated for individual people in the early periods. So it was a quiet period for the individuals, except who were affected in what I just referred to. But as the time was happening and tightened the knot gradually, that it carried over, that I sensed as a child that things at home were no longer the same. Conversations by our parents were hushed and spoke the language with their original language. And our food and new clothing was limited because our parents' businesses were suffering. By 1942, deportations of Dutch Jews intensified, and people dealt with a false pretense that the Jews would serve as a labor force in the East. Sensing the danger, our parents decided to split the family. They placed the three youngest children, my brother Leo, my sister Lily, and myself, the baby, at that time, in what were regarded as, quote, safe places, such as tuberculosis hospitals, homes of nursing mothers, orphanages, and my parents had to find locations while they were taking care for avoiding being shipped out itself. Over the years, I reflect what happened, and I realized that there was much more activities for which I was not involved. Being young, I was just starting school. Our parents and my two older brothers, Aaron, and Yosef, they were in their home, waiting anxiously at home for documentations from a neutral country that relatives in Switzerland were in the process of arranging. Our father would pick us up from the safe homes at the time in the morning to go to the synagogue and check on our welfare. The deportation activity took place at night, and the daytime, because they all were homebound, able to catch and trap. And when the day started, people just were really allowed to go. It was more difficult to attach to the Jews or deportations. So my father came and spent my brother and myself in the synagogue, and we parted. One morning, when he did not appear, we understood that our parents and brothers had been rounded up for deportation in Westerbork. The last memory I have of my father was sitting on his lap with his big tefillin, phylacteries, on his head the previous day in the synagogue. The pattern of the Nazis was that those on the transport list would be packed into cattle cars on a Monday night, Tuesday night period, and they would be shipped out to Auschwitz or Sobibor. Our parents and brothers were put on such a list a few weeks after arriving in Westerbork. From the cattle cars, people threw out postcards and letters, which many locals posted. We received a postcard where our mother told us to take good care of each other and reminding us that we have relatives in Switzerland. Our older brothers added Lehitraot on the postcard. This was the last we heard from our parents and brothers. Upon their arrival in Auschwitz in January 1943, they were gassed upon arrival. We 3 children were now on our own. A few weeks later, the Nazis rounded up children, including ourselves, from different orphanages in Holland to be deported to Westerbork. There, we faced the same fate as our parents and brothers. Wherever there was an outbreak of scarlet fever in the children's barracks, to protect their soldiers, the Nazis put a quarantine on the children's barracks. We were then put on the transport list for the following Monday, Tuesday pickups. On the Shabbat, before we were scheduled to be deported, Honduran documents arrived from our relatives in Switzerland, but unfortunately, these documents were too late to save our parents and brothers. These documents spared us from being transported to death camps. These Honduran papers were part of an effort by a group of Jewish activists and non-Jewish diplomats in Switzerland to forge documents for neutral Latin and Central American countries. Jews paid a hefty sums to acquire these documents for their relatives in Nazi-occupied countries. These documents changed our status, as the Nazis needed such people for prisoner exchange, for medications and materials for the war effort from neutral countries. The Nazis did not know what to do with us 3 children, as we were not suitable for barter. And they needed space in Westerbork for additional arrivals to be shipped east. They transferred us for 1 month to Amersfoort, a political prisoner concentration camp. I was told by my sister that I was in the infirmary with higher fever there. And when my sister was ordered to return to Westerbork, she refused to leave without me and took me back while sick. After that, in Westerbork, we were requested to appear before the Gestapo. While waiting in line, a Dutch lawyer advised my brother to tell the Gestapo that we had relatives in Switzerland. When my brother was asked whether he spoke Honduran, he told them that he had relatives in Switzerland and mumbled other responses. To this day, we don't know whether the Gestapo posed a trick question or did not know that the language spoken in Honduras was Spanish. After a year in Westerbork, in February 1944, we were sent to Terezin in Czechoslovakia because we had a special status documents. Terezin was used for people with privileged status, such as the leader of the World Reform Movement, Rabbi Leo Beck, former Minister of France, Leon Blum, the neurologist Viktor Frankl, scientists and other dignitaries who were able to be used as a negotiation for being helped. While conditions in Terezin were substantially better than in death or slave labor camps, they were very meager. Terezin was built to house the Czech army of about 7,000 soldiers. The Nazis converted it to hold as many as 60,000 inmates in the overcrowded, cold, unsanitary, and disease-ridden conditions. And they were with 35,000 people who died in Terezin, 150 each day from malnutrition, disease, and old age. Our living quarters were primitive, no privacy. My sister was by herself in the women's section. My brother and I were together on the third level of a bunk bed in the men's section. We had straw mattresses with nighttime visitors with bed bugs. Each inmate was given a metal bowl, spoon, cup, and monthly ration card. My brother and sister told me that I never lost any of these. The food lines were outside of the barracks. In the morning, there was coffee from leftover coffee grounds and dark bread if there were leftovers from the soldiers' breakfast. The lunch and dinner consisted of string beans, more strings than beans, potatoes that were mostly peels, dark bread, and barley soup. If one was at the beginning of the soup line, he got liquid. And if at the end of the line, there was no soup left. We started being streetwise and quickly learned to sneak into the middle of the line. And the people were very nice to us three to do so. Twice a week, there was meat, horse meat. Our religious upbringing taught us that horse meat was not kosher. But the rabbis there told us we must eat it in order to survive. The Nazis did not want children to have skills and knowledge should they survive. Was education prohibited? but a number of adults were eager to provide some instruction to us in the evening in an attic after they came back from hard labor. A person stood outside should a Gestapo come to inspect. Then we would switch to playing games, as the Hanukkah story had that situation the same. We were taught arithmetic, history, geography, with maps of Israel and about Jewish holidays and some songs. To lift our spirits, we sang songs.
Two of the songs that my father always says they sang were songs from the prayer, yeah, from the prayers.
From the prayers. Shomer Yisrael, Shomer She'erit Yisrael, we sang. Guardian of Israel, guard of remnant of Israel. And Sim Shalom, grant peace. I was not aware of the content of the songs, but I sang along after that. It had a lot of content to this day. To keep busy, my brother and I were assigned to do office work at the Jewish Council. My sister, only 10 years old at that time, collected ashes from the crematorium. The day also consisted of outside roll calls in all kinds of weather. For a child, I led a drab life. I did not have steady friends, as new people kept arriving and leaving on transports, death camps. When there were other youngsters, we played with Monopoly game made out of paper, used the tin can for football, soccer, and roamed around permissible barracks. The religious observances were limited. In the Jewish Council building, there was a minyan on Shabbat, but it was scheduled early to enable the inmates to go to work. Around Pesach time, my brother and I saved our potato rations for our sister to, quote, bake matzah. My sister's version was that it was to bake a birthday cake for herself. My brother became bar mitzvah while we were in Czechoslovakia. In January, had his birthday and bar mitzvah, and people were very kind enough to help him prepare. He was taught the Haftarah and the Maftir, but he had to have, or would have desired to have, tefillin when he become of age, and the people were trying to obtain that. There was no store to acquire it, and they located that a Czech scientist who had 2 sets of tefillin gave my brother their small traveled film. After the war, my brother had the tefillin examined by a sofer who was amazed that they tefillin were kosher, because such tefillin are very usually defective, because when the tefillin are opened and closed, the ink crashed. The Nazis, facing hardships, were eager to acquire medicines and critical supplies for waging the war, and sought the support of the International Red Cross. Before our arrival, the Nazis took a section of Terezin, beautified it by transforming it into a functioning resort with cafes, a soccer field, false money, flower shops, concerts, and the like. They selected Czech-speaking people so that the Red Cross would not be able to converse with them. The Nazis invited the International Red Cross to inspect how well the Jews were living in Terezin. And they were escorted to the new resort, bypassing the rest of the camp. The delegation fell for this propaganda ruse and agreed to obtain the items requested by the Nazis. The Nazis made a propaganda film of the resort to counter charges that were mistreating the camp inmates. They even issued a press release that declared, quote, in German, "While the Jews are sitting in cafes, drinking coffee, eating cake, and dancing, our soldiers have to bear all the burdens of a terrible war, its miseries and deprivations to fend their motherhood." After the delegation left, the Nazis destroyed the resort and transported most of those who were involved in the propaganda to Auschwitz in order to destroy evidence of this fraud and to prevent those who were forced to be part of the scheme from revealing that the resort was staged. Nevertheless, the Red Cross, as a goodwill gesture, to take 1,000 of the inmates who had connections to Swiss citizens. We were advised to forego this offer as it might be a ruse. The inmates who did go on this freedom train, as it was called, were asked to report back by a code. If correct, write back a particular phrase, but if not, write back another phrase. As it turned out, the train did go to Switzerland, and we missed that opportunity. The war took a turn to the worse for Germany, and they decided to accelerate the transports, initially to Auschwitz and later to other death camps. We were rejected for the next train that we're told was going to Switzerland, but instead went to a death camp. We were then put on the next list, but without our knowledge, someone distantly related to us went to the Jewish Council and asked them to leave the children alone. This train also ended up in a death camp. The scarcity of working railroads for the Germans made them decide to gas Jews in Terezin, and a gas chamber was built. we were again put on the list, unaware of the new gas chamber in Terezin. Fortunately, the gas chambers in Terezin were never used because the Germans were preoccupied with destroying evidence and escaping themselves. As such, we were once again spared. At a roll call, we saw the Russians approaching and watched the Nazis fleeing with their bags. One soldier threw a hand grenade at us for good luck. Unfortunately, it did not go off. The formal liberation by the Russian army took place on May 9, 1945. The Russians shared their rations with the inmates and tossed candies to the children, my first candy in 2.5 years. At the same time, I saw a Russian soldier grab a watch from a woman. And later I learned that some soldiers assaulted the women. We were fortunate to be liberated by the Russians, who had limited food supplies compared with the British, American, Canadian, and French food supplies, who opened their kitchens thinking to be generous. But many people got sick and some died as they couldn't absorb the volume of rich foods. After liberation, we were initially kept in Terezin because there was an outbreak of typhus. In order to be released from the camp, survivors were required to provide an address to which they could go. People were very fearful that if they would not have an address, they would rotate in the country and would go on the revenge group. And they didn't want that to happen, nor did they want them to settle. They didn't like the Jews before the war, they didn't like the Jews after the war, and therefore you had to have an address to be re-entered society. Fortunately, we children had no such address. Fortunately, we were under the responsibility of a Dutch social worker who arranged for us to be released and return with her to Holland. We had relatives in Holland who survived the war in hiding. When they learned that we survived and there was no sign of our parents and brothers appearing, they took the 3 of us in. The burghers, 2 children, were hidden separately for the whole war and had to move elsewhere to make room for us. We started Jewish school, but in lower grades, of course. We also went to Hachshara, the training part for Israeli farmers. We also went Hachshara in Hilversum with the burghers' children who were planning to go in Aliyah. We stayed with the burghers in Amsterdam for almost a year. 75% of Dutch Jewry was killed, murdered in the Holocaust, the highest percentage in Western Europe. Part of the reason why they had such a high rate was because they were very organized. One feature was that there was a sabotage in Holland where they destroyed the roster of Jewish addresses, events or so, and they put it on fire. They were very upset, the Nazis, and they insisted to reconstruct the listing. The Dutch are very organized, and they fulfilled it. Another country nearby had a reputation for being lax and not orderly, and they had a death rate of 40%. The survivors who started coming back to Holland wanted to get out of Europe as quickly as possible. We were still there. We heard, first of all, people who came, introduced to play with children. They were in for a month or two, and the people left. So I had very little friendships, any stability. But we heard a lot of stories or events, what people went through, for which we were not fully acquainted. One example, when parents who placed their children in the custody of the church, such as converts, convents wanted to retrieve them. They often met with resistance by the church and sometimes by the children as well. And the people couldn't get their children back or lasting them. The burghers made contact with our mother's sister in Zurich, the ones who acquired the documents. And our father's brother in New York made contact. Both wanted all three of us to be together, but it was decided that my sister would go to Zurich and my brother and I would go to the Shiva education and full education with an uncle and aunt. In mid-June of 1946, the Joint arranged a pickup children in Europe who were heading for the United States. We were raised by our uncle and aunt, and Siegman family, who had 6 children of their own. They provided for all our needs, for which I am eternally grateful. In contrast to my lost childhood, where I went through the war and lost my parents and brothers, my subsequent life has been very rich and fulfilling. I had a comprehensive secular and yeshiva education, and university education as well. I had a wonderful career teaching economics for 9 years at the college level, followed by working 31 years at the United States Central Bank Federal Reserve Board in senior positions, and then as an advisor at the International Monetary Fund. I am blessed with a wonderful wife of 60 years, 4 children, 13 grandchildren, and 8 great-grandchildren. Ken Yerbu, may they blossom. We are grateful for the privilege of living in Israel, something our parents and grandparents could only have dreamt about. We are proud of our 3 grandsons who served in the army, 2 who are currently serving, and 3 granddaughters who served in the Sherut Leumi National Service, and 1 who is currently a Bat Sherut. Let me conclude with some reflections. First, I have survived being a Holocaust survivor. Not everybody, unfortunately, succeeded in doing so. As I reflect on being a child Holocaust survivor, I realized that I was not in the driver's seat. I didn't do anything to survive, neither my strength nor my wisdom. Decisions were made by others. I felt like I was driftwood, but my fate was determined by God's invisible hand. Being a survivor did not entitle me to special privileges or excuses for my shortcomings. While never forgetting the loss of parents and older brothers, I was determined to be forward-looking. I valued education after being deprived of education as a child. I wanted to be judged by my achievements and not by being a Shoah survivor. For many survivors, their war experiences presented a challenge to their faith. Many people abandoned their faith after the Shoah, but it's not in our place to judge them. As Hillel taught, do not judge your fellow man until reached his place. Many people ask, where was God? Why did he allow this to happen? But the question, we don't know God's ways, but the question should be, where was civilized man and allowed this to happen? The Nazis were determined to destroy not only the Jewish people, but also Judaism itself. Abandoning my faith would have meant giving the Nazis a victory. After all, my parents named me Yechiel, may God live. And by living an observant life, I am continuing their wish for me. The importance of a strong Israel cannot be overestimated. With very few exceptions, the civilized world closed their borders to Jews who were facing extermination. The British Mandate closed the doors to Palestine and sent boats back to Europe. Canada's policy was none is too many. The United States did not fill the quotas for European countries, etc., etc., etc. Jews now have a welcome haven in times of need. Therefore, we must give Israel full support. It is essential that the world remembers the Holocaust. This is urgent as the survivors will not be with us much longer to bear witness. It is frightening that there are people who deny that the Holocaust happened. I am a witness today, and I urge you to take on the role of being a witness about the Shoah in the years to come. After the war, the anti-Semites went underground for a while, but now there is widespread public resurgence of anti-Semitism, which spills over into anti-Israel propaganda and hate of Israel. High priority must be given to developing an aggressive program to deal with this disease before it is too late. Germany came close to winning the war. Fortunately, they did not succeed. Therefore, in a sense, we are all survivors. I thank you for listening. Questions? If you have any.
I was going to ask, the re-emergence of anti-Semitism that you mentioned. I was wondering if you had any insights into what is it? Is it a divine? Is it part of the Gezerah on the Jewish people that the Goyim will just hate us and want to kill us? Is it something supernatural? Is it?
I'm an analyst for this behavior, but it's been a disease over time with different categorizations. Some was church related, some was jealousies by kings and others, and even the quote educated environment, they are not active in snuffing this out. And they are accommodating right now the United States, I understand, of being quiet. So there is a problem. So there is a event, and they don't put a way to prevent it. I cannot tell you the psychology of it all, what makes them. But there's jealousy, there's all kinds of stuff. And unfortunately, they're very young people in this activity.
Charlie, do you ever think about that? By being a kid for all of those adults, you gave them their humanity. Do you ever think about the fact that you were a kid, adults like to take care of kids, like to be nice to kids, like to be helpful to kids. Do you ever think about the fact that because you and your sister and your brother were there, you gave those adults like a piece of a ray of humanity that they could give to you? Do you ever think about that? I don't know. I've heard your story a couple of times, and just today I'm thinking that was a gift. Your being at Terezin was like a gift to those people.
Yes. It's not easy to make judgments of how to deal with people. Look, when I was in school, first year in New York, I was put into a class, and they had recess, and they put me into the game of a thing, and the punch bowl was called. I don't know if you heard of punch bowl. And they put me in a room. I had no idea what was going on. And my luck was that the ball was hit in the field, and where should it land? To me. And the other kids started screaming, "You're losing the game, you're losing the game." I knew that was not a good message. And suddenly a young fellow, classmate at that time, banged on the field and he says, if you beat this boy any again, I'll beat the daylights out of you. But the rest, had to adjust. Children had to do this. It was a shocking event, but I remember him very appreciative. 20 years later, 20, no, or less, 12, 14 years, when we lived in Alderkinwood, we were already hosting people for Shabbaton. And I see a fellow who I recognized, the fellow who made that action on my behalf. He had no clue that ever happened.
No.
He didn't remember.
He didn't remember.
You said that after the war, when you went to school, so you were very determined to succeed. Was this something you thought about, that I need to succeed and study hard? Or was that just your nature?
As I said, in terms of doing work and doing the assignment, I was interested to go to the next stage, and was successful on that, and enjoyed it too.
And did you know other survivors? You hinted that other survivors were not successful in.
No, they were not. No, I wouldn't say that. They were failures of adjusting, or so. There are a lot of people in the United States, like in New York, who moved into the orderly way of progress, or so. But there were quite a few people in the synagogue in New York who had I have no idea exactly what his tragedies occurred with the family and everything else, who had difficult adjustment. No, I wouldn't generalize it, but there have been people I've seen, I saw. I did not want to follow that track.
In a similar line of question, I read Elie Wiesel's The Man's Search for Meaning, and basically saying that the people that survived had a reason to survive, if you need a reason to survive. But do you remember having any thoughts about that, or maybe through your siblings that survived, they were a little bit older, I guess, that maybe you survived for each other? Is that fair to say?
Well, I survived and wanted to be, quote, normal. And I quit AIDS. But that is, I would wish everybody would pick with AIDS to be productive and happy and all of that. I would not associate it necessarily with special features, but yeah.
In what age did you survive the Holocaust?
Well, what?
How old were you at the end?
Okay.
Yeah.
When the war started, I was 5 years old. When the activity affected me going, when I started school, I started school for a month and I was out. So then I was 7. That's where the effects on myself and my brother and sister, that where it came the stage. So from 7 to 9.5, I was in that period or so. My sister was 2 years older, and my brother another 2 years. But they were the start of the war, of the deportations and everything. My brother was old enough, but not old enough. And my sister similarly, but eventually we had to do.
And how do you start your life? What's the point you go to school, the basic stuff? What is the first normal thing you did after the war was ended?
Normal, the first one, the candy.
It was a good candy.
No, I mean, no,
I'm thinking, how can you start? You had a degree, you did so much, your achievements are high for a person without a crazy history like this.
well, it was, I had my relatives were very advanced people.
How old were you when you got to New York?
19.
You were 11.
How long?
11.
Another year and a half.
So was it in 46 that you got there?
Yeah.
And so you were
11.
11 years
Just
old.
Right.
And what grade did you go to?
Oh, which grade I went to?
Did you speak, had you
Yes,
speak
yes,
English?
yes,
You didn't
yes,
speak
yes.
any English?
What? Yes, yes, correct.
Did they speak Yiddish or English in school?
In which school?
In your school that you went to?
Dutch.
No, I mean,
In America?
From
Where?
where I was Dutch. I spoke Dutch.
you
Okay,
didn't speak
and
Yiddish.
pardon?
You didn't speak Yiddish.
My parents did speak Yiddish. Okay, I don't know how much I picked up. I was a child then with them. Okay, and I also picked up German.
So when you went to school, it was an English-speaking school.
English because of Manhattan Day School.
You had day school?
Mhm.
Wow.
It wasn't called.
It wasn't called that yet.
What?
It wasn't called that yet. What was
Yes.
it?
What, in Manhattan?
Yes.
In Manhattan day
My
school?
father's aunt and uncle lived on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. They had a whole escape story of their
That's where
family. And
the,
so
the ball game hit me.
That was-
that was where the punch bowl.
So which street were you living on in Manhattan?
574,
574 West End Avenue.
Which is West End and
86.
86.
84.
Wow. So when you went, so go back to school. You're starting school at 11 years old
Yes,
and you don't speak English
right. Okay, they put me
and you
into
didn't, you never went to
reduced-
school
What?
and you didn't really have any
Exactly,
school.
no, they put me 2 or 3 years
Yeah.
younger ago. And I hate to report that, I was sensitive because I went through that, but in Holland as well. In the year I was in a different one, a grade. So the teacher, okay, I'll give one name of the teacher was Dr. Young's sister.
Oh, wow.
She was a teacher, excellent teacher. But the main teacher was somebody else, no name to be given.
Less excellent.
What?
Less excellent.
Excellent. And no, he was a good teacher, no. But I said, when I get what was promised to me. So he says, you're not ready because I want to have you in my class. Because you answer the questions well. That was a pedagogue.
You mean he didn't want to advance you?
Because he liked having
Oh,
an
he liked
advanced,
having
he
you.
liked having an advanced student in class. Right?
Okay.
But also just
But
to
then
help.
I went to Theresienstadt. I went there
What, for high school?
for next, yes, for the, not, I was was that I started in the yeshiva, had lower grades classes, and before long I ended up in the high school and the higher classes, eventually with Moshe Feinstein. So
That's our motion from the students.
Those are a remarkable accomplishment.
people were a little more orderly, I think, of going to school and not are. So
You caught up 10 years that you didn't have.
okay, maybe I missed some things. Well, I know certain things I missed. I never was able to draw pictures because I never had the not elementary, so never had a.
And did you ever have an accent? In
I have
English?
no
In
accent.
English?
There's no accent at all.
No,
Can you remember having an
except
accent?
that in college, I had a class, 4 classes over the years of speech. And the first day I come to all the students had to greet the
Professor.
the one who's giving up the test. I gave a sentence and I had to report that. So he tells me, Mr. Siegman, you are suffering from what? Cognate confusion.
I go bold.
You know what that is? Cognate confusion? Different-
Cognate,
Not cognitive.
not cognitive.
What?
You said cognitive or cognate?
Cognitive.
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 Like your thinking is all messed up.
It's the mixture, the confusion between D and
No, cognate. He said cognate
Oh.
confusion. But you had a speech problem.
Oh,
Yeah.
and B's and B's and P's and, okay.
okay.
That's what he said.
So, but I think I overcame that.
Also, just to help understand, the aunt and uncle that my father and his
Yeah.
brother came to live with, do you want to say, they
Yes.
themselves had been through a
Oh, they
arduous flight from Europe.
Right. And also,
Right.
and I was in an environment of young people too. Because they had
Because they had children
6 children.
your age, similar age.
Well, so 1 or 2, yes, and other even one were going to graduate school already or heading out. So I got exposed in a house which was active.
But that was
It
also.
was an
That was
exceptional,
also heroic. of
it
them
was
to take
heroic
you
of
in.
them,
Absolutely.
and
A
it
large
was-
family settling
Absolutely.
themselves.
and to this day, those cousins were like your siblings. We grew up calling them aunt and uncle. It was perfectly natural.
And people didn't
People-
know.
people had no
thought he
idea.
was a child, nobody.
Also, they were all Kohanim, right, priests, and so on the holidays in synagogue, right, they stood up to give the priestly blessing. In America, it's not every day, it's only on the holidays. And so, right, there was this
And
big
soon they were
clan of the
brothers.
Siegmans, right, all getting up together. Nobody knew there was a difference. My father also was very fortunate, besides studying with the great halachic decider of American Jewry, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. The family synagogue in New York was the synagogue where Rabbi Soloveitchik served. And Rabbi Soloveitchik was very close with the family.
Used to
So my
Maria-
father,
where?
Maria.
Maria.
So my father was fortunate to be
Exposed.
exposed for intense periods of study and prayer
Total
two of
blessing.
to 2 of the greatest leaders of American Jewry.
Did you, after the war, when you're in New York, was there survivor groups? Or
Yeah.
you're basically
Older people.
older people?
Older
people.
Older people,
Yeah.
had lots of shop.
Correct. At that time, people came from different situations So they traced me down after a while, that is a group for the people who were in Terezin. But it happened to have been in Florida and California. So people were not writing and going for these things. So I had the book of names for a while, but it was not a successful or meaningful thing. It didn't last much longer after I did not become active.
Plus, you also always explained that you really didn't know other kids in Terezin. First of all, they separated the nationalities because again, the less mixing, the better. The barracks were separated by nationalities. Plus, right, you explained, Terezin was a train station. People came and left, and the goal was to get them out.
We were in the Dutch, we didn't mix the people. The Dutch barrack and the German barrack, we're not supposed to interact with each other. Also open gates, not open gates, but open fences or so. But people came in and left. And I had a fellow with whom I played. Next week, he's gone. Very difficult to develop relationships. And there were I don't recall anybody from Westerbork. I met people because it wasn't, okay. But I did not meet anyone in New York, and later on, once in a while, somebody was in Terezin, but either was a Hungarian or Danish, but they had nothing in common except being there.
Until we came to Israel.
What?
Until we came to Israel and all Nahama, one of the ladies was with them on the train from,
Right.
the name is
One
Lieberman.
second, the
From
story,
train from where, which? train?
after, one second, after the war, my aunt kept up with one woman who my aunt came to Israel subsequently from Zurich, and then here she kept up, she met, she kept up even there, right? It was
Yes.
the woman who was also her age in Terezin, okay, they had
Right.
been together.
Exactly.
And then you said, what do you want to say?
And when I came to visit in Israel, I wanted to meet her, I remember. So she said, wait, while my husband can't make it, now come another time. He was working in the post office, but he was also going to college because he gets a upgrade. So each time I came, he was not available, this and that. Fine. So later when we settled here, I asked my sister, I'd like to speak with, have her over. So that's okay. So
they came for lunch and they walk in the door.
they davened in the shul where I
The
davened.
husband was somebody who sat near my father in synagogue here in Jerusalem. He had no idea that
She recognized
this
me.
man was married to somebody, and they'd been in Terezin with them. But that was just a fluke. I mean, that is,
Very linked. It's no alumni group.
also, the Terezin that's famous is the Terezin of the Czech children, right? There's a beautiful collection of poems and drawings that were collected in both Hebrew, English, and other languages called famous poems. I Never Saw Another Butterfly. I Never Saw Another Butterfly, a very famous poem by a Czech Jewish child in Terezin with drawings. And so there were exhibits in museums, and there are books called I Never Saw Another Butterfly, or The Children of Terezin, or The Artists of Terezin, and all of those are the Czech Jews, because we always asked you, people always asked, right?
Oh, yes.
Did you know them? Did you draw? My father said, I didn't know any of that.
Well, but part of it is that the booklet was containing the Czech population.
Right.
That's why they started the deportation, when they unfortunately killed enough people then there was room for the others. Okay, so everybody, when I came in the States, after we heard about this, said, "Oh, what picture did you draw?" Now, it happens to be wouldn't have been a good drawing anyhow. But,
Maybe a poem.
Exactly. You could have written the poems. right?
oh, yes.
Right.
But I'm totally out of it.
Also, I mean, it's interesting, the other experiences of Terezin that my father also wasn't aware of. We went a few years ago on a family trip, all of us, to Terezin. And there they had discovered about 10 years ago, 12 years ago probably, what they called the hidden synagogue of Terezin. Basically in the area of all of the workshops and the places where the adult Jewish inmates were forced to do work every day, they built themselves one room and a half in which they could pray, especially mincha. And it's got some beautiful decorations by someone who had painted some other synagogues in Europe. It's really, really beautiful. But you stood in there and you said, you'd never seen this.
It was not public.
It wasn't public, but you as a child, right, experiencing on the
Right.
same place, you would have had no idea. It was
The people started, they had to do the daily
Right.
work, fixing things up. So the people who were there, they had.
It's like
literally-
garages and factories.
Everybody thought it was a synagogue, which is yes and no. Of course, they had a common prayer together, but they had no Torah.
But they etched some verses. into
Yes,
the-
the ceiling is painted by a someone who had painted other synagogues in Europe.
He was a chazan in England.
Exactly.
He was a chazan in England, and he was also artistic.
His relatives lived
He
in
had the paint and the other things he
Because he was working.
I think it was like car
why
repair.
they allowed to do that, I don't understand. either.
Can I ask one last question?
What?
One last question. So you knew the day that your parents
No, that's
were
another
taken, or you did
story.
not know?
Yes. The custom for people who lose parents or relatives to say Kaddish. A lot of people had no records of what their dead family members. So
Meaning the date, or
What?
just the fact?
Initially, yeah.
No, I'll tell you in a minute. So the rabbinate said, if you don't know, let's set a certain day and do it. If you're going to belong in a group rather than not know anything at all. So the 10th of month.
Totally.
What?
Sarah Batovic.
Yes. No. What?
The 10th.
Sarah Batovic.
Right.
Also, the idea was that was already a fast day on the calendar, and so this would be an appropriate
So the
date.
first few years, when that date was established, I was the only thing I had to do. And I
Can I just interrupt? In other words, people observe the date that their parent died as a yard site, as a day in which is the Kaddish. So many of the people after the war didn't know when relatives died. So they declared,
Most people.
so declared that
The chief
Rabbi said
rabbinate of
that's-
Israel established.
Then
that's
there
the
were
days for everyone.
But they
to say.
didn't know the actual date.
How,
we actually-
right after the war, this information wasn't available to
No,
most people.
No idea when people died.
Later on, there were reports that there's an organization in Germany that is not an organization, but it's a location where they are gathering information from.
I think it was the Russian files that.
No,
were
that was
released.
later.
There were
That was
different-
Later, yeah.
So the
Red Cross,
what?
the Red
Then that was
Cross.
later.
Right. The Red Cross was organizing that. So they said, if you are you one person who is looking for this, give us information and we'll double check what our database is.
You mean they had records of the transports Is that what they
transport and
had?
the gas.
Whatever, they took all kinds of.
So there were a few
information.
stages though.
All kinds of stages. And the first one, I got a letter from them. I had to give the names, what they used, one, others, and where we were out. Okay. They answered, sorry, we don't have any information on you. Fine. So I continued saying my Kaddish on the tables. And suddenly they called me, they were very formal. Could I come to deliver something for you? So they came and they gave me a list of my parents and brothers, the date, location, everything else. But the irony of it all was that it was published in the journal in Holland many years before.
You didn't know?
No, who reads the roster of the names? None of it, right?
So the record said when they were
When, yes,
transported.
correct, yes, and it fitted in with all the schedules of the
Of leaving Westerbork,
Westerbork and
beginning
all
of the
that.
week.
So I have the actual date.
But that was only in 2000,
Wow.
okay?
Wow.
So
Oh, that's
2000.
really good.
Had the journal been available, it would have been much earlier. But first of all, the technology was not as good at gathering and monitoring, and but the updates came late.
I just want to mention that one of the pieces is at Yad Vashem, they have is tens of thousands of records of the trains, who's on the train, where it's going from, going to Auschwitz or to Treblinka. The Germans, they had such meticulous documentation that you have tens of thousands of lists of people's names and where they were transported to. And people can reconstruct from their families.
On the internet, you
Where
can
they went.
find also registration cards from the Jewish councils. I mean, every person was documented with codes of where they were next sent.
So what is the date of the yard site of your family?
To B'Shvat, just a month later. I was close, but I didn't.
Any other questions?
So you actually returned to Holland during the war still.
After the war,
You went back.
So,
after liberation by the Russians.
Right.
Right, then they had to give an address to be let out of Terezin. And then this Dutch social worker who had an address to go back to used that address to get the 3 children out. And then they stayed with these relatives for a year.
so it's also after liberation in the Netherlands, or
After the Netherlands was also liberated, right?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Absolutely,
Yes, yes,
absolutely.
yes. Very similar date.
One question, my great uncle, I mentioned earlier, that survived Auschwitz, he really didn't talk about the Holocaust much during his younger years when he was working. Only in the last few years that he was alive did he really start talking, and they actually sent over a person to interview him from the Steven Spielberg thing, but he felt that it was his responsibility at that point. I'm wondering if you had a certain similar feeling that you have a responsibility.
No. I wasn't, given that I was young and I was discovering, I had to figure out what happened and where and what. So I took it upon myself to piece together like a puzzle of sorts. And then I obviously shared it with the family, and it was more neutral. I was not saying I was not redo of my parents' life, I was not able to locate that. There was nothing there, right? I know when I learned the date, it relieved me too. Or so, but that was already.
Did you feel an obligation, or do you now feel an obligation to tell your story?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
When did that start?
Oh, started with the shul had annual one. So
In Silver Springs?
Silver
So
Springs.
my father helped initiate that, an annual
In Maryland?
outside of Washington.
right. And then I took care of scouts. Local people asked for those local. And then when we came over here, became more open. And
It's also
so
a
I started more with young people.
Cafe Europa. And it's a group of Holocaust survivors. There's a social worker. And they meet pretty much every week in Gino Ta'ir on Emek Refrain. She's a wonderful social worker. And she always needs people for speaking in the salons.
But that's later.
That's
Yeah,
That's
that's just.
right.
First, my father spoke at all the grandchildren's schools and youth
Right.
groups over the years, elementary school, junior high school. Each time he would go back to the next classes.
For the young
And for
children,
the,
when they hear that somebody was dying, but was in different places, older people, little kids, it's difficult to connect. When I said I was 7 years old, really? You didn't have candy? No. So I was able to relate with the young kids. But later on, I've had very interesting groups, including this group over here. It wasn't all the same road item. I've had from India, and I had from
A birthright group.
Birthright, right? And that was my job to
Tell your story.
tell the story.
Well, we're honored.
Well, you do a wonderful job here too. Very,
Thank
very
you.
good.
You gave us an experience that is experience of a lifetime. And telling your story.
Yeah.
It's a privilege.
Yeah.
Privilege. Anyway, I want to I really thank you for being here.
Okay.
Thank Dafna for
Well,
suggesting it,
Thank you for agreeing.
and
Thank you all for coming.
we really value everything you've said, and it's very, very moving. And I can just say personally, I remember one day going for mincha at the Shtiblach, which is the shul just not far from here, where they like every, and I happened to be there, and you were leading the davening, and I asked you why you were leading it, and I don't remember there was Tu B'Shvat, but now that you say it, I do remember that. And we walked out together, standing in the beautiful sun in the spring of Israel, and I asked you why you were leading the davening, and you told me you were saying Kaddish for
I
your
remember
family.
that conversation.
And
Well, I wish you all well success, and in a world, I wish I could promise the world is more stable than, well, not war, but we could achieve a big improvement for people to make the world
a
better.
safer place.
And, all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's take a break.
Exactly. Quick stretch, break. We'll go to street life. We'll go to street life because it's 7 o'clock. It's fine, I'll take you to street life. It's fine, I'll take you to street life. It's fine.
Oh, yeah, the menu is right here.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's done at 7. It's 7, it's almost 7. It's fine.
Yeah, I don't think the first one. He does this.
There's fruit and coffee.
Nice to meet you. That's
She's right at the end of her process. She's right at the end of her conversion process. They're gonna be getting married soon. Really says,
far from here, 2 minutes from here. You know the neighborhood? Near the bus stop.
It's next to Terezin.
It's next to. Yeah.
When did you come to it?
Far. 20 years.
Oh, wow.
We were still going back and forth. So they're answering somewhere we went back. By your house. That's a long time.
Yes.
Really. It takes her stuff with them.
Children also.
Only we could get along over here.
It's hard to go.
That's why it's so basically got a flexible.
how long are you hearing this from them?
Successful.
Thank you. Probably I should come take something to drink and to eat, and then I'll take you to, we'll go to street. Oh, you have time. Time wise, you're clear. It's fine, we're good. We have time to stay well. Yes.
That's